over on Sunday.
Nice.
Then my oldest, he graduates kindergarten next week.
Oh,
so
cool.
we'll have a bunch of family coming in for that.
Nice. Love
It's
it.
supposed to be nice here. I'm looking forward to the sun. I get some sun and
not
beach
here.
time.
It's rainy. It's gonna be rainy tomorrow and rainy all weekend. So
Oh
it's
man.
cold.
All right, I'm gonna kick things off here. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Conversion Tracking Playbook podcast. Three-time guest, I think, Ben. This is your third time recording with us.
Yeah,
So
I think at least 3. Yep.
Yeah, so we're in season 3, and everyone that knows Ben. Actually, Ben, just tell everyone about you.
Sure.
I won't steal your thunder on the intro.
Yep. So I'm Ben Zettler. I'm the founder of Zettler Digital. We're a digital marketing e-commerce agency. We support folks with Shopify site design and development, email and SMS management, and customer acquisition work on the advertising side. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts. Ben is an email expert. If you're not following Ben on LinkedIn, go give him a follow. He's always breaking down new features that are coming out from Klaviyo and just the world and email and marketing in general, and dabbling in AI as well. So this is a topic that might be basic for some, but I think with how much I'm seeing Klaviyo change, you're much more up to speed than I am. But just email and SMS programs in general are changing, and how AI is helping personalize better and segment better. But the basics, what are the top X? So I don't know if it's top 5 flows, 10 flows, but what are the top X flows that at the minimum when you're doing an audit for a new customer that every brand should have in place?
I'm still shocked to this day when I go into an account and I see either a brand that doesn't have some of these at all, or if they do, maybe they haven't been touched in 2, 3, 4, 5. I've even seen 6 years. Welcome flow, abandoned checkout flow, browse abandonment flow. Those are the 3 we always start with.
Yeah.
And as basic or rudimentary as it might sound for some, for others, they sometimes do not have that in place, or they have conflicting messaging in place. Like maybe they have a very basic abandoned checkout flow running in Klaviyo with just the baseline stock content inside of that message that's not even branded to them.
Yeah.
And then maybe they also have the default Shopify abandoned checkout email that's going out. And nothing is really speaking to their customers in the right way. So when we start with a new account, those are the places where we start first. Is what information are you sharing with new prospects, the people that you're trying to convert for the first time? And related to that welcome flow is going to ultimately be your pop-up, your sign-up form, the place where you're acquiring that user inside of your list. And that's a whole nother topic we can get into in a few minutes. But refining how you're presenting information to a user when they're first signing up. If there's a discount incentive included within that sign up, how is that information being presented to them? Mm-hmm. When is that information being presented to them? So at what time intervals are we triggering messaging? And on the abandonment side, such an opportunity to speak to different groups of customers, whether they have purchased from you before, whether they haven't purchased from you before, but they've expressed interest in a particular product that you sell, or a particular category of products, and you want to maybe differentiate messaging between those. Once you go ahead.
Can I just double tap on that one? So that you're essentially doing a split condition if an existing customer then run different flows or potentially different messages. So if you know that I've purchased something before, you are going to communicate to me differently versus if I'm a first time customer, first time to the list, and I've never purchased from you before, correct?
Yeah, 100%. Like the first conditional split we might put in place, it's going to be most applicable to a brand. Let's say that high likelihood of a repeat purchase, consumable product or something like that, where
right,
you're very likely to incentivize that list sign up with a discount incentive. Now, let's say they've cycled through a welcome flow, they've received all messaging, they've yet to purchase. They now have gotten closer to that point. They've added something to cart, they've gotten to checkout, they've abandoned checkout, but they've yet to buy. If they haven't ultimately bought before, that's where we might put in front of them the same structure or maybe a slightly different discount incentive to get them to get pushed over the edge for that first purchase. So it's first a split on that, whether they've purchased before or not. And then it next may be a split on what would technically be in Klaviyo a random sample. So it's a way to like split test. It's not really split testing, but it's just to differentiate messaging between two different groups.
Right.
So if we want to test whether or not they should receive a discount incentive, that's usually how we would do that, as opposed to just a traditional A/B test. That way, it's just easier to serve then follow-up messaging that, oh, you've got your 10%, you still didn't purchase. Okay, continue to serve that same code versus, oh, we sent them an A/B test, and then we have to add other more complex conditional splits to make sure the right users are receiving the right messaging. But yeah, we like to test stuff like that. I kind of view that stuff as more, we'll call it entry level, like the baseline things that most folks should be doing.
Even testing, so just testing discount versus no discount, you view that as base level, like basic 101?
Yeah, 100%. Because you could see pretty clearly, even out without technically running a formal A/B test, like whether or not something's having an impact.
Right.
And if you're seeing that users are converting from that email twice as much if there's no discount incentive in that email for those first-time buyers, then that tells you something.
Right.
Obviously, you want to look a little long-term as well at users that bought with a discount. What's their frequency of purchase for a second order, or time to second order purchase, or retention rate within a first year, and some more like complex things that you can get into. But even on a baseline level, just are they converting better? Are we making more money by offering a discount incentive in that first email versus are we not?
So just to recap the flows, welcome flow, that's when the first time they join your list, most of the time that's going to be through an email, some sort of offer pop-up. And then you're going to run a sequence based on potentially various conditions. If you have any attributes that you're asking for, like product type or gender, in that pop-up, you might have conditional splits in that welcome series. Flow number 2 is going to be cart abandonment or checkout abandonment. And then flow number 3 is going to be browse abandonment, where they just view a product, but they don't actually add to cart to make it farther down the funnel. So those are the baseline top 3 flows. Then within each, doing the conditional splits. So you talked about discount versus no discount, new customer versus returning customer. Are there any other common conditional splits that for an average brand, average audit, call it between 50 and 150 or maybe less than 200 AOV that you would recommend or service in an audit?
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of alluded to it. At the point of sign up, we've been really big advocates for getting users to submit some piece of zero-party data, ultimately answering a question and submitting a piece of information about themselves. If it's for a coffee company, do you like decaf or regular? Do you like single-serve pods or whole beans or ground beans?
Yeah.
And then using that information to serve the right content inside of the welcome flow, but then that carries over to the abandonment messaging as well. So if there's users that have said like, yeah, I'm searching for women's shoes versus men's belts, or just women's versus men's, then that gives you a clue into what they're most interested in, and then you can really tailor that content. So we're big advocates for that. And in fact, I'd say it's been about 2 years where we've really leaned into that for all of our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And we have seen in every single situation where we've done that within sign-up forms, where we've actually increased form submission rates by asking for that question. And there's a lot of really great tools that are out there that can help you facilitate pop-ups. Ask a question, that take that data, pass that over to Klaviyo, and then you can use that. But we've been really big advocates for just doing that inside of Klaviyo. Like the pop-up tool can get you far enough that you don't necessarily need to be using some of the other very good tools that are out there, especially if something that we advocate for, if you have email and SMS both living inside of Klaviyo, then you can have Klaviyo sign-up forms that are taking both email and SMS consent.
Right.
And you can follow a decent template design-wise to make it easier for folks to sign up. So you'll see relatively high form submission rates that you don't need to shell out a ton of cash to use another tool for it. But that's been really big, and that's been a way that we've been differentiating messaging across any type of flow.
Right. Okay, so that's the next layer of this onion is personalization. I know a couple years ago, even probably a year ago, grabbing that zero party data, whether it's in the sign up form or post purchase, and using that to personalize flows or content within an email. Again, is that as difficult today to accomplish, where you're getting the gender split or the belt versus dress or women's, whatever it might be? How easy is it to take that information and personalize within emails today?
Klaviyo made an update sometime last year that actually does make it significantly easier to use that information if you want to display dynamic blocks inside of a message.
Right.
So it used to be that you'd be building a message, and let's say you want to personalize a banner. So like have that banner only show to someone that has indicated that, you know, they like gummy worms instead of gummy bears. And, you know, I'm
serial killer. Serial killer.
So you used to have to code that block. You know, use information that you needed to be familiar with from a like more of a development perspective to be able to extract that information and say like, oh, this user who's receiving this is interested in gummy worms. But now it works very much like the segment builder inside of Klaviyo. So inside of the message, you click, you want to serve something dynamically, you're just selecting a profile property, like from a drop down menu. And so they made it super easy if you want to personalize an individual piece of content inside of a message, or you can also simply use a conditional split. If you're serving, you know, a whole message that is going to be geared to a particular audience, and that conditional split based on a profile property. And you can do the same even outside of flows, but for campaigns, if you want to create a segment based on that profile property and then send those specific users a message. It makes it actually really easy to do that now, which is cool.
Do you find that there's friction in creating the content for that? So I'm thinking of, you sell a cleaning product and you're splitting based on, you know, the sign up form of like, do you ride dirt bikes or do you ride four wheelers? And now that you have that information, so in theory, you could show dirt bikes or four wheelers in the email, talk about that, you know, the differences, and show the differences in the whole flow. What's the friction and additional time it takes to create that content?
That's always the big debate. It's how much
ROI. I imagine it's like, am I going to get an ROI on that?
Yeah. How much information are you going to collect versus how much information are you actually going to leverage? And at what point are there just diminishing returns of like, well, I had this quiz and I have all these 10 different customer groups, and now I'm going to create 10 different pieces of content and send it to all those groups. Well, it takes, whether it's a person or if it's AI, there's still time that it goes into mapping all that out and creating all that. So yeah, there is a point of diminishing returns. And what I recommend to folks is don't keep it general. Like, you want to get information and extract the right information that is going to be valuable to you, but you don't necessarily have to go the route of building like complex quizzes to, you know, get crazy amounts of information. It can very simply be, you know, we want to align banner imagery and other content and subject line and, you know, a few rows of text based on a response that someone might have given. What's nice about it in flows, like once you've created it, great, it's created and you can kind of let it be, versus like, you know, if you've created a survey and, you know, there's 3 different core customer groups, let's say, and then every campaign that you send out, and you're sending 3 campaigns a week, you're creating 3 different versions. So you're really sending 9 campaigns a week. I don't advocate for stuff like that, because I think that at that point, even, it is sort of overkill. Now you still want to be careful about, you know, who you're messaging and how often they're receiving messages and how often the users that you're messaging typically engage, and being conscious of deliverability and just in general your costs and all that. But it is kind of a case by case thing of like, at what point is it worth it, right? You know, if it's a brand that's just starting out and you are you only have maybe at most a couple thousand users in your list, then my recommendation would not be to think about serving unique messaging to, because
you don't know your customer at that point. It's just
you don't know who they are. There's also just not the volume of folks there that where it makes sense. Like, you know, if you have a couple hundred users that you might send something to, the likelihood that any more than, I don't know, 20 or 30 people even click on it, it's just, there's a very clear lack of value there in doing it. But when you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or whatever the numbers might be of users in a list that, a toy company we work with, for example, if we know that, okay, 30,000 folks have indicated that the thing they are most interested in is a stuffed animal versus a board game, then we know who we're sending the stuffed animal campaign to.
Right.
So some of those things will kind of be obvious to you over time. They'll be obvious in the data that you collect. The thing that there really is no cost to is asking a question, is putting that in a pop-up and getting some piece of information that at the very least is going to differentiate users, whether you even start to use it now or you use the information later. Because even on, like I said before, that the form submission rates alone have significantly increased when asking a question as part of a multi-step form to get email and SMS sign up.
Yeah.
For every client that we work with, bar none.
It's psychology. I recall in, I'm trying to think what the context was, but it was all around this pop-up sign-up form. And if you just ask a binary question as step one, like yes or no, or some other, just you get two choices. It's human psychology where like you've already invested the time to start the thing, so you want to finish it.
Exactly.
And it was probably like a quiz builder. The quiz builder is where this some of the psychology and research came into play. So not surprised to hear it. Another easy place to put it is on your account sign up form. So if you allow for creation of accounts, which everyone does, just add it there as well.
Yeah. And you can even use that stuff as thinking about other flows, trigger points, maybe to a deeper quiz about your product. I think about like workout supplement companies and trying to understand people's, current health status, their workout habits, their goals, dietary restrictions. When you collect information like that and you know that, okay, somebody is vegan, well, you're not necessarily going to send them whey protein.
Right.
Or the other way around, like they say that they're vegan and you release a vegan protein, there you go.
Right.
Then you have a group of users that you can go to and send pieces of information. Or for folks that have indicated they identify as a woman and collagen may help skin and hair and nails, and you have content that's geared towards that audience, then send them a campaign that really highlights that. So last year's that you can do that.
So if we just tie a bow on this personalization, if last year's personalization was using your first name in an email, and this year's personalization is at the minimum grab the content in a form. So just grab like some sort of information, zero party data that could be used for personalization. And then if you are at scale, so 100,000, or maybe you have a segment that's tens of thousands of people, then use that specific info in a particular or personalized campaign message. Did I summarize that correctly?
Yeah,
Did I miss anything big?
So. Yeah, so that way at least folks aren't overextending themselves,
right?
Especially if it's a smaller team. Just regardless of the size of the team organization, like if it's just one or two people that are handling the retention work, you don't have to get overwhelmed. Use the information where it makes sense. Always collect it, and then you can leverage it at the appropriate time.
Or AI will leverage it for you eventually.
Right, it'll tell you what. Yeah, exactly. It'll tell you what to do.
What about segmentation? So closely related to personalization, what's the base segmentation that when you were auditing an account, just looking for best practices, what should people have in place?
I'm also shocked here the things that I see, like auditing accounts of two very distinct groups of customers or of brands. One is the team that is totally conscious of deliverability, but to a fault, where they're sending only to a very highly engaged group of users, and effectively ignoring a much wider subset of their customers that they could reach and they could drive some real revenue from. And then on the other side is folks that have never heard the word deliverability, and they are just sending indiscriminately to their entire list, and they're wondering why their open rates, even though open rate is like really not a real metric anymore, but their open rates are in the teens, if not lower. They get like 0.08 click rate, and they're wondering why.
Right.
So segmentation is super important. I try to, the way I like to like do it inside of the platform itself. So like inside of Klaviyo, what do the actual segments themselves look like? I don't like blanket segments that are kind of a combination of different things, because it can kind of hide, it can hide different groups. It can kind of muddy the data. What do I mean by that? Like, I'll see a lot of brands that'll say like, okay, engaged last 90 days. And that'll be like, they've bought, they've been active on site, they've clicked at an email at least once, they've opened an email at least once in the last 90 days, all inside of 1 second. Even if I wanted to target those exact groups, I would split all of them out. And I would say clicked at least once in the last 90, placed order at least once in the last 90, active on site at least once in the last 90, and then open at least once in the last 90, but with Apple privacy open equals false. So at the very least, I know that that's users that have actually opened.
Right.
Because then what I can see once I've sent a campaign to those specific groups, inside of Klaviyo reporting and an audience breakdown, I can see the differentiation of performance across each of those. And then to take it a step further, if that brand is using marketing analytics, which is Klaviyo's new function for really getting more out of the platform and more out of the data that's in the platform, you can see reporting like that more holistically across the entire account, all of your sends, not just one individual campaign send, but according to groups like that. So if I know that, like, I mean, it's going to be fairly obvious that people that have clicked in at least once in the last 90 days, that group is going to engage much more effectively than the users that have only opened in the last 90, opened and not clicked, or however you want to differentiate it. But at the very least, I know, and I can see that information.
What do you action? Like, what if someone isn't segmenting out like that and they go segment after this pod? What's the action they take when they're looking at that report in marketing analytics?
That'll tell you, let's say if they've been sending a little bit too indiscriminately, that'll tell you maybe where you shouldn't, where you can kind of peel away from sending those wide sends or leveraging too much of open rate data, because open rate is actually, I'll pause there and mention that for a lot of folks that don't know, because I still see people talking about it, open rate is basically an irrelevant metric.
Right.
When
Apple, if you're on an Apple device, it spoofs it.
Right. And not a lot, unfortunately, not a lot of people know that, but it's been, a couple of years now.
Yeah.
That, iOS 15 essentially nixed the validity of open rate, because they send a false open metric back to email service providers. And so it looks like anybody that uses Apple Mail on their device has opened a message, even if they haven't. And that's why, like, I get people all the time that say to me, oh yeah, we're just not making the money, even though, our open rates are 60, 70, 80%. And no, they're not. They're just not. It used to be that, like, a quote unquote, like, good open rate would be like 25%. That was kind of the benchmark. If you're sending a fairly wide message to a big portion of your list, if you're above 25%, great. That same type of send, if it was at 25% before, now today shows up as like 40, 45, 50%, if not higher, because such a high concentration of users use Apple devices for so many brands. And so it's not really a good indicator of, like, actual interest in the message that you're sending, because you think that all these people are opening and oh, why aren't they clicking? Well, they're not actually even opening. They don't actually care.
So the action is looking at those segments, is you're looking at click rate. So if
click
it's
rate,
a low click rate, then you're saying, hey, you might be spreading too wide. And is that where you start to get more narrow and get into the personalization conversation, or what are the step 2, 3?
Yeah, so we try to get more narrow in terms of who they're targeting on a day-to-day for their messaging. We also like to take a little bit of a deeper look at who would we qualify as unengaged or dormant, or whatever we want to call it, But if we know that there's a group of users, and it's inevitable. Every account I go in, there's usually a couple thousand at least, if not tens of thousands. But users that have been in the list at least, we'll call it 6 months, they've received at least 10 emails. They've received at least one email in the last 3 months. They've never clicked. They've never purchased. They've never even been active on site, or any other metrics that we might want to add. But those are kind of like the core. We'll usually recommend suppressing those users right away, just getting them out of the list, because they've clearly shown that there's no action that they're going to be taking, even if they have opened. I mean, and you can differentiate in Klaviyo between someone that has opened, where Apple privacy protection or Apple privacy open equals false, meaning we know that they've opened, or if it's rated as true, it means they have opened, but it's been from an Apple device. That's usually that segment we'll create is usually pretty like telling, and we'll recommend it at the very least, even if brands are uncomfortable with suppressing, which more comfortable with suppressing now because of Klaviyo's price correction a few months ago in charging on the number of active profiles in your account. But the very least is suppress those users from the majority of campaigns that you send, if not all.
But if they have a activity on site, so page view or product view, then they will not end up in that suppressed list in this example.
Correct. Yeah, for that specific scenario, they wouldn't end up there.
Okay.
Which and that's kind of the whole point. It's here's this chunk of users that are not engaged really on any level. Maybe you imported them from a conference 3 years ago. Maybe they signed up for a giveaway from social. Maybe they whatever. Somehow they have ended up in your list.
Yeah.
From something that was done a couple of years ago, or 6 months ago, or a year ago, whatever it is. So step one is always like get those people out. Now step two is there's going to be some folks that are in there that they have legitimately engaged on some level, but maybe they haven't gotten to the point of purchase before.
Yeah.
And that's where you can use that as an opportunity to try to speak to them in a different way. Like maybe there's, 20% of a list that they're just sitting there and they've been there 6 months and they've opened and they've clicked on emails and they've even added stuff to cart, and then they've just never bought, and they've been there for a while. Is there an offer that you can present to them? Is that something that you want to send as a campaign? Maybe you can start with sending it as a campaign, but then depending on the success of that, maybe you tweak the segmentation slightly and then serve that as a flow. So as users continue to drop there, you're sending messaging to them that is showcasing the value of your products, is putting it in place, sort of rejiggered welcome offer, is doing something to have them take some action. Klaviyo calls something like that, a sunset flow. Are you putting something in front of users that gets them to engage on some level? And then if they don't, do you consider suppressing them at that point? You should.
This is why there's no shame in this plug, but this is why just Elevar filling that void of tracking, because if you just play it out where you run a Facebook ad, user clicks on a Facebook ad, goes to the site, they opt into the email. So at that point, if they're on their iPhone, every cookie on there expires in 24 hours. Let's say they go through different flows and all this. They're opening email, so they're in the 90-day like either conversion or maybe their second purchase flow, and they're getting emails, but they're not clicking the email and they're not going to the site like through that email, but they're just doom scrolling or whatever it might be, and maybe they click another Facebook ad and come to the site. Klaviyo won't make that connection. So they won't get that activity back, even though they're on the site browsing. So that's I would say it's probably an edge case. We don't really talk about this as much at all either, where there's part of like saving users from going into suppression or suppressed lists just by making sure that Klaviyo knows, okay, this person is still active.
100%.
I think maybe that's why, because we have brands that'll stack Elevar and like they'll add all kinds of different technology stacks just to get like incremental 5 to 10%, and they'll put us and other competitors just to try to maximize the amount of users that Klaviyo is getting identification or visibility into potentially when you're in the millions of subscribers, it's probably like a pretty big lift where you don't want people to go to your suppressed list because then they're dead and you have to reacquire them essentially.
Yeah, 100%. You kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's why, a shameless plug from my side, like that's why we recommend that every single client of ours does use Elevar, because the ability to identify the users that are taking action on the site is massively important. And we've ultimately seen in results of, if we're running a browse flow that is triggered by the Elevar event versus the standard Klaviyo event, and seeing the differences in performance, or I'll say the additions to performance of a browse flow, or the same for a cart abandonment flow or a collection abandonment flow. It's been massively impactful there. But then exactly for creating segments, whether it's the dormant subscribers or whether it's users that haven't just had recent activity, like the more accurate information we have about the actions users are taking on site, the better. The better we can sort of bucket them into certain places.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Bad Birdie. I bought a couple shirts and I try to buy. I think they're in our pipeline, but I don't know if they're a customer yet. But I try to buy from customers whenever I'm wearing anything. But it just reminded me because I'm that person. I get the emails. I don't always open them. I'm definitely not clicking through them, but they're still in the back of my mind. Like, yeah, I'll probably buy something from them again. I'm probably getting to that 90 day or maybe post 90 days, and I could end up in that suppressed list. And if I don't get an email from them, they're like, if they're not top of mind, I'm gone. Like not because I want to be gone, because I just forget, and you're onto like another brand. So that's a pretty that's a good reminder on just making sure you're connecting any activity so they don't get in that suppressed list. You started to talk and share about a few metrics that I want to transition to, like key metrics that you look into for the health of an account. A few notes that I had here was lead to email sign up metric and time to second purchase, but you'd mentioned a few other metrics that are ones that you look at. So in your audit, what are metrics that you are measuring and evaluating a brand's health on, or either email, SMS health?
Yeah. Retention rate, which is something that Klaviyo has started to surface in their own reporting that folks will see when they log in, is something that we like to look at, which essentially, what percentage of users have placed a second order within a year, which is how they're kind of measuring it. And there's different ways you can obviously play with that too. Like if you say instead of a year, is it 180 days? Is it 3 months? Is it 2 months? So that's a big one. We also like to see average order value for users that have converted through an email versus those that have not. Users that have used a first order discount incentive that we provided via email versus those that have not. Anything that compares like email subscriber and or like converted through email specifically compared to users that didn't convert through email specifically, or just straight up not a subscriber, is always really interesting to me, because that can kind of like tell you where to put a certain emphasis on if you're trying to like push users more into a certain bucket. So those are some of the things that we pay attention to.
What's a red alert? What is a metric that would be bright red? If it's like, what's the metric and what's the number?
Yeah.
Where if you open up an account and you're like, holy cow, this is bad. Bad news.
Well, it goes to like the kind of the segmentation and deliverability stuff, but I believe the number that Klaviyo publishes that is sort of a red flag for like bounce rate, for example, I think it's 0.3%. I've seen way higher than that, which is not good. And that's always the accounts where really wide sent messaging, no exclusions on the campaigns that you're sending, low open rates, low click rates, and then you have all these users that are bouncing. That becomes a really big problem and something to mitigate essentially right away.
What about anonymous user identification? I won't name company names, but is that a direct impact of bounce rate, or do you still see that as a net additive to accounts where yeah, they're going to see some customers, some users, and they won't call them customers, but people that fall out because they were misidentified, but it's a net win for them. How does that play into this metric or just in general?
Yeah, I've seen that be an issue with identity resolution tools that are out there, that a brand might be using, that um, that bounce rates are high, and it's creating problems for them. And you know, worth mentioning too that all the tools that tout, yeah, we're gonna send content only to users that aren't otherwise in your list already, where reality is maybe they are identifying users that are on the list already, and whatever exclusions are in place aren't actually working. And so someone that's a regular customer is getting pushed into that flow and receiving messaging you don't want them to receive.
Right.
So it opens up a can of worms for like a lot of potential issues. But just on a high level, like bounces I've seen be really problematic kind of across the board in a lot of scenarios with
because that just hurts deliverability into Gmail or others.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like, you could be sending all the emails you want, but if it's not making it to somebody's inbox, then that's the biggest problem that you could have.
Yeah. What are a few tips that you have of getting that first purchaser to second, third order impact or effect? So you can, I know LTV to CAC and that 90, like getting someone to repurchase in 90 days it's a huge target for many brands. So what are some tips that you have in this retention world?
There's always this misconception that people should really talk about for their emails, that obviously a welcome flow, or at least it should be obvious, a welcome flow, if it's performing well, is really being driven by other channels. It's not being driven by email. Like that first welcome flow email didn't drive a sale. It's just a result of your acquisition efforts.
Right.
So we try to also ignore what many have started to call, just day zero. The someone has entered the list and they've immediately bought, whether within an hour or 6 hours or whatever it might be. Because those people that have bought, they had intent to buy.
Right.
And while
they came to the site and they got the coupon, they're like, yeah, I'll take the extra 10% off, but my mind was already made up.
Exactly. Now, the users beyond that have yet to purchase are really the ones that you have to sell. And that's where it can get pretty interesting, I'd say, in terms of, how you want to serve messaging to them, how you want to present certain information at a certain level of scale too, like how you're going to best leverage the information that you might have collected at the sign up, or what you even have so far on what they browsed through the site, now that they've been in the list for whether it's a day or 2 days or 3 days, and what they've looked at.
How often should you be testing that messaging and splitting and everything that goes into that, trying to convert for the first time?
I say it obviously depends on the volume of users that are flowing through a list. But, if it's a brand that there's at least a few thousand users that, let's say, are coming into the list every month, and you really want to hone in on that second welcome flow message, then every few weeks you should be changing something with that. I don't like doing like subject line tests. Who cares? We've been over it, right? Like there's not much clear information that you're going to be able to extract open rate wise. So, that's really the one thing that a subject line test is going to impact. I care more about the content of the message, and how does that potentially impact the sale.
Right.
And so every few weeks, even if it's not technically statistically significant, but if you have at least a few thousand recipients and you're starting to see, some clear paths to where users are converting, even if it's 40 users converted from this version versus 25 users converted from this version. Again, even though it's not statistically significant, you would still kind of lean that one with the 40 and then keep iterating on that. So that could be just every few weeks.
What about first purchase? So that getting somebody's already bought once and you're trying to get them to repurchase. What's the top 3 recommendations you have to maximize that percentage?
Yeah.
That you can control through email, obviously, like make sure that there's no defects in the product, or make sure delivered on time, things like that. But within your control, and retention, email, SMS, What are some tips that you have?
I am shocked still to this day how many people will buy from a brand after just buying for the first time before they received the initial purchase. We've done a lot with transactional shipping and delivery messaging, both through some really great tools that are out there, and then now with the enhanced Shopify and Klaviyo integration and how they send over both shipping and delivered events. You can kind of do it through there too. But I'm shocked with how many people will buy off of that messaging. Now, what is transactional messaging? So that is information that is pertaining to your order, shipment, delivery information. You can't be promotional. You can't offer 20% off to the message that you want to have marked as transactional, meaning that everybody in your list can receive anything applicable. But what you do on the page that message might link to, you can do anything. So if you want to present an upsell offer, if you want to surface information tied to the product that they might most likely be purchasing next based on their first purchase, that's a way that you can ultimately do that. That's one component. Another component, to give another plug for Klaviyo's marketing analytics functions, the ability that I can't recall honestly if it's live or if it's coming in the pipeline, but the ability to serve a dynamic product block in a message based on that user's affinity for purchasing that product. So like the product they're going to likely purchase next,
right,
is an excellent feature, and that can be as simple as post delivery. It doesn't have to be a transactional message, but you can use the delivered event and say, okay, product delivered or shipment delivered, and 3 days later serve this message. Or obviously too, there's like Klaviyo's like most likely to purchase next metric, which we've tested before, and that works well too. But yeah, like while something is in transit, it's still surprising to me like how often people will buy. So if it's something compelling enough, if you have the right product mix, like sites or brands that have either a single SKU or a much lower SKU count relative to like 30, 40, 50 different things, or even hundreds of things that people could buy, it becomes a little bit easier at that point. But yeah, you can leverage that information inside of Klaviyo today and put that right into a flow and see what happens from there.
Something we've been testing is called a comeback score property. So just a binary. So is this user likely to come back and repurchase within X number of days? So basically taking all historical customer data, order history, building a model around those customers that have repeat purchased using first and third party data. So psychographics, things of that nature. And then anytime a net new user buys, is attaching just true or false. Are they likely to come back and buy? And then this is something that hopefully we can just help incrementally improve that repurchase rate, where if you wanted to just conditionally split based on that true false, where if it's true, maybe this is where experts like you come in of how would you tailor the messaging to be a little bit different, even, and perhaps there's a persona tied to it as well, to just maximize that repurchase rate.
Yeah, and that's where you can start getting creative, I think, with the content that you want to surface in certain form messaging, based on what information you have. Like, if it's showing the product you just purchased in use and the product that you want to then surface to those users inside of that next email, if it's leveraging the data that you've collected at previous steps to then speak to that particular group of customers, it kind of opens up some possibilities, or a lot of possibilities, for what you could do at that point.
Awesome. Well, 45 minutes of amazing email, SMS knowledge. If you're listening and need help with email, SMS, marketing, web dev, anything, all the above, reach out to Ben Zettler, Zettler Digital. All right. What's the one thing? If someone is going to walk away and do one thing, take action on one thing, what is it? What do you recommend?
Stop emailing your entire list, suppress users that don't have any business being there. You're going to save money, you're going to improve your deliverability, and you're going to actually reach more people than you were before.
Man, mic drop. Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Any parting words from you?
No, I just say if anybody has the plug for us, anybody has any interest in getting support with their email marketing, they can certainly go to ZettlerDigital.com. I'm always on LinkedIn, so if there are people that have questions, I'm always happy to help folks in the community too. So I'm there.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Ben.